Where did you get that dress? It's awful, and those shoes and that coat. Jeez.
Welcome back to our Part 2 coverage for Airplane. If you haven't seen Part 1, we suggest you do that now. Otherwise, let's continue. The way the Zaz team directed was unique, as most of the crew noted that they worked like one mind. Jerry did most of the directing, while David and Jim kept near their monitors. The three were usually in agreement on everything. If not, there were small notes and minor changes to a scene. The way the team worked was that if there was any disagreements, then the majority ruled. There was minuscule ad-libbing in the film, as every line was planned out by the Zaz team. There were a few changed scenes, but the main exceptions was Steven Stucker, who wrote all of his own lines, and Al and Norman, who wrote their own Jive talk. The key thing to understand is that this film was literally a remake of 0 Hour, and so many scenes and dialogue are completely identical. They also copied a lot from Airport 1975. Now, I could go into scene breakdowns and comparisons, but I don't want to do that, as there are other channels that already committed to doing this extensive work, and they deserve your views more than I would, because if I did it, I would just be copying their work. There are two I would recommend. One is the Gookies channel, and the second is Walker. They are very fun and cool to look at, so check them out if you're a fan of this movie. During the early days of the shoot, Lloyd Bridges really wanted to understand his character, but the problem was there was no character, and it really plagued him. The directors just wanted Lloyd to play Lloyd Bridges, and he just didn't get it. One day, he got really frustrated. What the hell's going on here? Robert Stack, who was playing opposite him, finally tried to explain things to Lloyd. Look, there's a spear going into the wall behind me, and a watermelon falling on the desk behind you. No one's listening to us. Just keep talking. Now, before taking the part, Peter Graves thought the script was trash, and he actually threw it across the room in frustration. In reference to the script, he stated, "This is insane. And not only that, it's the worst taste I've ever seen from any piece of material I've ever read." But Graves got a call from Howard Koch to meet the Zaz team in his office. And when he heard that Robert Stack and Lloyd Bridges has been cast, he began to rethink the movie. So he took a leap of faith and signed for the film. One time, Robert Hayes brought his parents to the set and introduced them to Robert Stack, who they enjoyed. Stack, seeing an opportunity, tried to lift Hayes up in the eyes of his parents. "You know, Bob was a guest star on my show when I was doing Most Wanted, and now I look at this like I'm a guest star on his show." And I thought, God, how cool was it that he just said that? He was exceptional. I just love the guy. During the take where Stryker and Elaine are talking outside the cockpit, Julie messed up her lines and cut was called. Robert Hayes recounts the true nature of Julie Haggerty's personality. And she said with that little voice of hers, "I'm sorry. No, Julie, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Script, have you got a line for her?" And she said, "I'm sorry. Don't worry about it. That's okay." And so they went over the line, and she said, Yeah, I've got it. I'm so sorry." "No, don't worry about it, Julie." So we start again, and I blew my line on purpose. And they said, "Cut." And she said, "I'm sorry. No, Julie, that wasn't you. That was Bob." And she said, "Oh." And then she said, "I'm sorry." It was so cute. The car to pick up Rex Kramer was actually Robert Hayes' '66 Mustang convertible. He was paid $35 a day while they used his car for 2 days of filming. It was rumored that Leslie had done so many dramatic roles that he coped with the heavy drama by doing practical jokes, and one of his jokes on set was a fart machine that a buddy of his had made.
Although I will do almost anything I can for a laugh.
Leslie constantly used it to make sounds on the set, and even sold them to whoever wanted one as well. Finally, it became so commonplace that they would demand they all be collected before filming. Leslie had that little magical machine of his, and in front of the executives, he made it do that noise. And he looked at me and went, "Julie," and I wanted to die. And this wouldn't stop for years to come, as Leslie would often do this in many of his interviews in the future.
You had not done a great deal of comedy before Airplane, had you? Or
Well, just a little bit.
The shoot would last around 39 days, and it was very smooth thanks to the Zaz team knowing exactly what they wanted. Howard Koch encouraged everyone, and the cast trusted the producers and directors. The shoot would end on August 8, 1979. The Elmer Bernstein score was wisely made as if the movie was a drama. The Zaz team told him they wanted a B-movie score that was corny and full of cliches. And Elmer delivered the perfect music for this zany comedy. The score takes scenes seriously and yet jovial. It's a brilliant score to match this kind of film. The final hurdle for the film was the Directors Guild of America. They refused to let the three men share the credit as directors. So Jim changed his name to Abrahams and Zucker, and then reapplied for guild membership and got his card under that name. After hearing about this, the DGA sent Don Gold, who was a DGA representative, to investigate. He hung around on their set for a while and watched the way they made the film. Thanks to Don, the three got director credit in the end. When Airplane was released, The Empire Strikes Back was still dominating the box office. Empire had been number one for over a month now, and it would continue to stay there until mid-August. Semi-popular movies that were still out and trying to stay in the top 5 spots were June 6's Urban Cowboy, Clint Eastwood's Bronco Billy, which released on June 11th, Brubaker with Robert Redford, as well as one of my top comedies of all time, The Blues Brothers, with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. The week before the release of Airplane, there were 3 films that offered little competition to the slapstick film. On June 25th, Herbie Goes Bananas, The Last Flight of Noah's Ark with Elliot Gould, and The Stuntman with Peter O'Toole were released. On July 2nd, 1980, Airplane came out strong in America, grossing $6 million on its opening weekend. Although the film would drop to 4.5 in its second weekend, this movie kept trucking unlike other movies. It averaged healthy grosses for several weeks to come, and it was that longevity that caused the film to be so successful. On the same day Airplane came out was the failed Sea Wolves with Roger Moore and Gregory Peck that made a paltry $220,000. Within a week, Blue Lagoon released. On July 5th, with a wide theatrical release, even though it was released on a limited basis in some cities on June 20th, and would make $58.5 million. Airplane's biggest competition came on July 11th, 1980, when tons of comedies were released. The weakest of the bunch was Chevy Chase's Oh Heavenly Dog, followed by How to Beat the High Cost of Living. Used Cars did fair with $11.7 million and had a sense of sarcasm that Airplane shared, but in the end, Used Cars would lose to Airplane's popularity. My Bodyguard did well with $22.4 million, but despite the good writing of that film, Airplane still won out in the end. On July 18th, 1980, it would be Cheech and Chong's next movie that would finally win top comedy for that week. Despite that, Airplane would continue to stay strong. Also on June 18th was The Big Red One, which was an epic war film with Lee Marvin, Honeysuckle Rose with Willie Nelson, and Prom Night with Jamie Lee Curtis. Despite all that competition, Airplane would become the 4th highest grossing film for 1980, with $83 million on a $3 million budget, making it the most profitable film made up to that time by Paramount Studios. Now, unlike most films that I cover, Airplane is a what you see is what you get kind of thing, and truthfully, the most depth you're going to get from this film is whether you get the joke or not. And if you don't get the joke, I can't make you get the joke. So, what I'm going to do here is just cover moments in the film and stories of making the scenes to give you some info, but the main meat and potatoes was the making of the film and what I covered there. So I'm basically going to do some bullet points now involving the scenes. Our first deleted scene for this film is when the married couple spots a friend of theirs at the airport and the police detain him. The scene was to suggest he was a hijacker, but it was cut because it wasn't funny to the directors.
Hi, Jack!
Now, when Captain Over is reading the mag says modern sperm, which I never thought I would say aloud. If you look at the shelves, there is a ton of smut to look over. But if you look at the category of magazines, it's just hilarious. When the big prop of the 747 nose breaks into the airport, look closely. You will see one of the extras was a woman who acted so scared that she humorously throws her baby doll into the air, and you can see it in the shot. However, the team only had one take for this expensive shot, so it remained in the film. That is some morbid stuff. When Ted runs up on Elaine, you can see a grip is laying cable, and the directors stated they didn't notice it when they did the shot. Whoops. When Ted Stryker gets his smoking ticket, one of the clerks was played by the Zucker brothers' sister Susan, who has appeared in almost all of their films. The man checking the hood on the plane was none other than Jimmy Walker from Good Times. Jimmy didn't want to be recognizable, so they accommodated him. The scene where the young boy and the young girl sit together was taken right out of a scene from a 1958 movie, Crash Landing, where an older man brings an older lady tea. This scene would have gone longer as the two would talk about relationships and careers, but was cut as it wasn't that funny.
Having a cup of coffee together, discussing education, business, economy. We don't even know each other's names.
Al White and Norman Gibbs created all the jive talk in Airplane. When they got the script, it was just gibberish made up by the Zaz team, and they knew it wasn't good enough. So they asked the two men to create their own dialogue.
They wanted jive as a language, which it is not. You know, jive is only a word here, a phrase there.
These two actors were so good at what they came up with that the Zaz team thought it would really be funnier if someone the audience didn't expect would translate for the audience. The person they came up with was none other than June Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver. Barbara Billingsley went to dinner with Norman and Al and discussed the idea of the scene. And Al noted that he actually wrote all her dialogue as the script simply stated that Billingsley would speak jive. My mother just loved Leave It to Beaver, and I asked Barbara if she wouldn't mind speaking to my mother. That was the crowning moment because I called my mother and I said, "Mom, I have Barbara Billingsley here, and she'd actually like to speak to you." She was so excited. The scene where Bob Hayes' stunt double vaults off the screen has an error, because if you look close, you can see Bob Hayes' head hiding while waiting for his cue to emerge. It's a blink and you miss it moment. The scene where Bob does the Russian dance and juggles was one of the few ad-libbed moments, as the Zaz team thought there was something missing from the disco scene. Bob said he could juggle, and the rest is history. Paramount owned the rights to Staying Alive. The fact that the song was used in this film overjoyed the Bee Gees. They loved the use of it in this film. During the scene where the young boy confronts Murdoch as being a basketball player, the scene was written a bit differently for Pete Rose. The kid would ask Pete if he was actually the baseball player, and he would say that he was. When the boy asked what he was doing there, Pete was to respond, "Well, a guy can't play baseball forever, Joey. Some guys sell insurance, others go into broadcasting. I thought I'd try acting." Peter Graves was very uncomfortable about doing the lines with Joey, played by Ross Harris. Although he would do the scenes as expected, he was very standoffish towards the boy due to his discomfort. Really, between scenes, he did not want any untoward contact with me, so he was a bit standoffish. I didn't really understand it at the time, but everybody else on the set was just really jovial. I didn't get it about Peter, but later on, once it all became clear, I was like, oh, okay, so this is what his deal was.
I really was scared of that. I thought, boy, this could end a 20-year career already. But we got away with it.
A cameo I positively love in this film is James Hong, who you should know from Big Trouble in Little China, Blade Runner, Revenge of the Nerds 2, and so many other films. His delivery in this movie is just hilarious.
I really couldn't blame Elaine. She wanted a career.
When Elaine is blowing up Otto the autopilot, she didn't think a single thing about the scene was obscene. To be honest, to me, I was just blowing up Otto the autopilot. He was a balloon, and that's as far as it went with me. So whatever anybody else wants to think, they can. But he needed to be blown up, and I blew him up. When Randy had to pull Kareem down the aisle, Kareem could only play dead weight. So when the call for action came, she couldn't budge him. He was just too heavy for her, and Kareem just laughed, as he thought it was funny.
So they had to stop everything, and they built a little platform with wheels on it so that I could pull him on wheels. And even then, it was somebody had to push him from the side.
The mirror joke with Robert Stack can be an easy miss for those not paying attention. He walks through the mirror after adjusting his tie, and it's a great editing gag. The scene where the passenger loses it and begins to get slapped was played by Lee Bryant, and when you see the scene, you can see the nun slaps her very lightly, as Maureen McGovern, playing the nun, was afraid of hurting her. It was her first acting job. However, Leslie slapped her for real and played it straight, adding an extra one for good measure. A funny little gag often missed is when Air Controller Neubauer is talking on the phone with McCroskey, even though they are just 4 feet from each other.
I know, but this guy doing the flying has no airline experience at all. He's a menace to himself and everything else in the air. Yes, birds too.
Okay, he's a terrible risk, but what other choice have we got?
You should recognize the man on the phone as Kenneth Tobey. Any science fiction fan should remember him from the iconic film Thing from Another World. When it came to the reporters and Johnny the air controller is responding to them, look close. One of the microphones is a melting ice cream cone. Another weird thing in this movie is that Mrs. Over is just as much a perv as Mr. Over by being in bed with a horse and then attaching herself to Kramer the way she does. There was a deleted scene where McCroskey and Kramer talk about the plane and its predicament over a water cooler and just use cup after cup while talking. It was fun to see the two actors in another scene together, but the gag got old super quick. When the air is turned on, note the guy in the background with the beard. Originally, the way the joke would have worked was to have his beard fly off, but it was too firmly attached to the actor. The sniffing glue bit was way beyond Lloyd Bridges' mentality. He was very anti-drug and lectured his boys about staying clean and eating healthy.
And he was very concerned, not dabbling in any of the drugs that were coming around at that time. So when that movie came out and we saw it, we gave him so much trouble over that.
Another spur-of-the-moment dialogue added to the film was when Robert Stack is asked about the searchlight. They thought it was great when he said,
"Oh, that's just what they'll be expecting us to do."
The lady who ruins her face with makeup is actually the Zucker brothers' mother, Charlotte Zucker, who gave up on her acting when they were both born and raised them. When her children started making movies, they put their mother in most of their films. During the credits, there's a couple secret jokes hidden, like the author of A Tale of Two Cities, and the final joke, which mentioned the copyright was protected by law. At the end of the notation, the filmmakers added, "So there," at the end of it, and the FBI was not happy about it. They sent strongly worded letters to Paramount after they discovered it, but the studio couldn't change it because there were too many prints in the theaters and they couldn't recall them, so it stayed in the film. Finally, there's an after-credits scene, which was not common back then. We see the man in the taxi cab still waiting. I think he will be waiting longer than 20 minutes. With the release of the film, the Zaz team were a great success. Paramount wanted to make a sequel to Airplane, and they did have ideas. They thought after the film, Stryker would take Elaine to meet his family, and it's the Corleones. The studio liked the idea, but when they ran it past Francis Ford Coppola, he was against the idea. And he didn't give permission, as he might do a Godfather 3 someday. So they decided not to go ahead with their idea and went after Top Secret instead. To date, some of them have never seen Airplane 2. When the film came out in 1980, I wasn't able to see it as a child. My family lived in the low-income projects of Norwich in Toledo, Ohio, and it was sometimes a rough place to live, and one of the reasons was because the adults were often dabbling in a lot of substance abuse there, including my mother. It was not uncommon for most kids in this environment to fend for themselves, and I found myself staying the night in another boy's house to get away from the violence that often occurred in my household. It was in this haven that I saw Airplane, and since I was a big fan of stuff like The Jerk, 1941, and The Three Stooges, it was right up my alley. Though I didn't get most of the jokes at the time, it did give me some good moments rewatching it on television during some dark times. As the years passed, Airplane 2 came out, and I was eager for the sequel. Since I was a sci-fi freak as a kid, I loved the new take. As a boy, I liked Airplane 2 better than the first, but as I aged, I prefer the first one over the second, despite my fond memories of that sequel. It was a competent sequel, and it's doubtful I will ever do a video on that one, but never say never. In the final analysis, Airplane was just ahead of its time, and spawned the careers of many comedians in Hollywood that would have never been taken as comedians. The film didn't care if you missed a joke, and it's a film you can see 20 times, and each time you'll see something new in it. The comedy style was subversive, and there wasn't enough winks at the camera to realize you got the joke, and that is a big reason why it's so iconic in my opinion. It's just smart, and it doesn't give a damn if it offends you. And in today's social climate, where a vocal group of people constantly advertise offense, I appreciate this film way more than I used to. Comedy should be able to shock you, and it shouldn't care about boundaries if it's done intelligently like this film does. This movie has everything for everyone. Well, we are at the end of another video, and we want to take a moment to not only acknowledge the commentaries, behind-the-scenes material, and interviews that gave us this information, but also the wonderful Surely You Can't Be Serious novel, which has a ton of stuff we did not cover in that book. If you're a fan of this movie, you might want to check it out. Next up for October is the beginning of our John Carpenter series. And of course, we will start with Halloween. And we will see you then. And rather than us saying goodbye, we'll have Robert Hayes do it for us.
I hope this hasn't been boring for you. It's just that whenever I start to talk about Elaine, I always get so carried away. I lose all track of time.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. You super thanks. It helps.